Entry is an original concept under the category Life Sciences. The effects of echinacea against community-associated MRSA.
So to start out with some background info, I'm going to begin with what exactly is MRSA. MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. It's basically a bunch of big words for a lot of bacteria. However, this bacteria has one special trait that makes it really different from other bacteria. This bacteria is completely resistant to common antibiotics such as methicillin, ampicillin, and penicillin. The antibiotics that are usually used to cure bacterial infections cannot work in the case of MRSA and its strands. And the problem with this is that now this bacteria is spreading with no way to stop it. MRSA constantly adapts, rendering more and more antibiotics completely useless. The two most common strands of MRSA are HA MRSA and CA MRSA. HA MRSA stands for Hospital-Associated MRSA, and CA MRSA stands for Community-Associated MRSA. In order to properly understand how big of a threat Community-Associated MRSA is, we have to understand how big of a threat Hospital-Associated MRSA is. Hospital-associated MRSA is spread through open catheter wounds and person-to-person contact. This affects people who have been recently hospitalized or have had frequent contact with healthcare centers. But this makes sense. People who have been in settings where the bacteria is or have had contact with the bacteria are more likely to be infected. However, cases of community-associated MRSA are now showing up in random groups of people, leaving no clue as to where the bacteria has come from and no way to prevent the spreading of the bacteria. Since 2005, the incidence of hospital-associated MRSA infections has decreased by 54.2%, but community-associated infections have decreased only by 5%. Hospital-associated MRSA is easier to prevent as it's easier to take more precaution in hospitals and more healthcare centers. Community-associated MRSA, however, is a bigger risk and growing at alarming rates. The next step is to look at the main difference between hospital-associated MRSA and community-associated MRSA. The main difference between HA MRSA and CA MRSA is in their genes. CA MRSA has the PVL toxin gene, while HA MRSA has the USA 100. The next step is to closely look at the PVL toxin gene. The presence of the PVL toxin gene is associated with increased pathogenicity. It's a beta pore-forming toxin, meaning it basically creates a bunch of holes in the cell membrane. This leaves the cell more perceptive to bacterial attacks because the barrier is unable to keep out bacteria. As a result, CA MRSA is able to get into the cell and infect it. Now let's look at another way that CA MRSA causes damage to cell membranes. Let's look at the role of hyaluronidase. This is basically an enzyme that takes healthy cells and turns them into infected cells. It does this by destroying the cell membrane, which allows CA MRSA and other bacteria to get into the cell more easily because there's no barrier keeping the CA MRSA outside. Similar like that of an action of a light switch, enzymes called metalloproteases in CA MRSA turns the hyaluronidase on, which allows the action to occur. Metalloproteases basically bind to inactivated hyaluronidase. This turns the hyaluronidase on and basically allows it to go and destroy more cell membranes. These cells are then left vulnerable and open to attack because they have no barrier to keep out the bacteria. So there's a common pattern to how community-associated MRSA attacks the cells and spreads the infection. They break down the barrier of the cell membrane. They break down the cell's protection against all outside factors. Once the cell's outside barrier is broken down and left vulnerable, CA MRSA can easily invade the cell and infect it. In order to find an effective solution to stop CA MRSA, there has to be a way to shut down the PVL toxin gene and hyaluronidase. This can be found in a plant source called Echinacea. Echinacea can fight a variety of infections, and it's available in many forms like tablets, tea, liquid extracts, and dried herbs. Echinacea also contains a substance called phenols. Phenols can be thought of almost as video game controllers because they control the activity of a range of enzymes and cell receptors. Phenols control whether or not an enzyme is inactive or active. They also control how intense the enzyme's actions will be. Another important element that echinacea has are alkamides. Alkamides protect the body's immune system. They battle out outside forces that are harmful, and they protect the body. Now here's where echinacea's properties become a really strong defense against CA MRSA. Echinacea contains inulin and properdine. Inulin activates the alternate complement pathway, which works almost like a shower knob. Once it's turned on, a system of plasma proteins form a cascade of factors that destroys foreign cells. Once the pathway is stimulated, it creates the membrane attack complex, which basically takes an infected cell and creates a huge hole in the cell membrane, causing the cell to destruct. Now, the really important thing here is that echinacea also contains properdine. And what properdine does is it makes sure that this attack complex is only used on infected cells, not healthy cells. So the end result is all the infected cells are being destroyed so the bacteria cannot spread and the healthy cells are protected. Properdin ensures that the alternate pathway is inactive in healthy cells and specifically activated on the surface of cells that have been invaded by community-associated MRSA. Another important action that echinacea does is it stops hyaluronidase. Usually, enzymes in CA MRSA bind to hyaluronidase, turning it on and making it active. However, echinacea stops this by binding to the enzymes in CA MRSA itself, which makes them unable to turn hyaluronidase on, effectively protecting membranes. In addition, the body already has a number of protective defenses against CA MRSA, like T cells and neutrophils. T cells and neutrophils are basically types of white blood cells, which are the body's natural way to combat outside bacteria. What echinacea does is it increases T cell replication and it increases the amount of neutrophils, which basically increases the body's defenses. So now for the plan of action. An easy way to locate where exactly CA MRSA has infected the parts of the body. Since echinacea's presence increases the amount of white blood cells and neutrophils, the easiest way to identify this would be a white blood cell scan. What this does is it takes a sample of white blood cells and tags them with radioactive material and puts it back in the body. Later on, when a scan is done, this radioactive material is detected and it shows places with high white blood cell counts, which logically these places would be where CA MRSA is localized. Now for the implementation. For people who have CA MRSA on their skin as a skin infection, echinacea can be used in the form of ointments, shampoos, and nasal sprays. For people who have CA MRSA in their body as a systemic infection or in the bloodstream, the first step is to use a white blood cell scan to find out areas of localized CA MRSA infection. The second step is to give echinacea in an IV directly to the vein and the area in which CA MRSA has been localized.